Lyria had always known her mission would be dangerous. As a Zarathi diplomat, she had faced countless challenges, but none like the one that now loomed before her. Her species was in the midst of an ancient crisis, a curse that only humans seemed to have the answer to. It was a curse that threatened to destroy her, and time was running out. She had been traveling through space for days, the familiar hum of the ship beneath her barely registering in her exhausted state. But the weight of the situation hung heavily on her shoulders. Her condition was worsening with each passing hour. The fever was creeping in, causing her body to burn with heat that no medicine had been able to soothe. Her skin was flushed, her mind clouded, and her strength waning. Lyria needed a human, a living, breathing human, and she needed one now. Her planet, Zarath, had long since forgotten the ancient bond between their species and humans. It was a story passed down through generations, but dismissed as myth. Yet here she was, carrying the desperate hope of her people, hoping that the ancient legends were true. The curse could only be stopped by a human, someone immune to the affliction. The tales spoke of a bond that transcended time, a bond that could save her life. But what if it was all just a myth? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sudden beeping of her ship's alert system. She had arrived at her destination, the human frontier. Her search for help had led her here, to a remote corner of the galaxy. The location had been chosen carefully, a place where humans and aliens coexisted, but not in great numbers. She needed to find someone, and quickly. As the ship descended, Lyria struggled to steady herself. Her vision blurred, and her hands trembled as she gripped the control panel. She had no choice but to press on, to find the human who could save her. The ship touched down softly on the barren planet's surface, and Lyria staggered out into the harsh sunlight. The landscape was unlike anything she had seen before. Vast stretches of sand dunes and rocky terrain as far as the eye could see. It was a harsh, unforgiving place, but it would have to do. Her mind raced as she moved through the alien town ahead. It wasn't much, just a few scattered buildings and makeshift homes, but it was the only place she could start. As she walked, she tried to steady her breathing, but the heat of her fever was making it increasingly difficult to think clearly. She scanned the faces of the people around her, none of them familiar. She didn't have much time. Her body was growing weaker, and she could feel the fever setting in again. The urgency was suffocating. That's when she saw him. David was a man of few words, the kind who preferred solitude over the company of others. He had spent most of his life on this remote planet, far from the chaos of the galaxy. He wasn't a soldier anymore, not in the way he used to be, but he still had the training, the instincts that made him a formidable force when needed. He had learned to live quietly, to avoid the attention of both humans and aliens alike. But today, that all changed. Lyria's eyes locked onto him as he stood outside a small shop, his back turned to her as he adjusted some equipment. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and despite the rough life he led, there was something about him that drew her in, something in the way he carried himself. She knew, deep down, that he was the one she needed. But as she took a step forward, the weakness in her body caught up with her. Her legs buckled, and she collapsed onto the ground. The fever was raging now, and she couldn't stop it. Her vision swam as she tried to catch her breath, but it was too much. Her world spun, and she knew if she didn't get help soon, it would be the end. David heard the thud of her fall, and without thinking, he rushed over to her. His instincts kicked in, and he knelt beside her, his brow furrowed in concern. "Hey, you all right?" he asked, his voice gruff but gentle. He could see the pain in her eyes, the feverish flush on her skin. Whatever was wrong with her, it wasn't something he'd seen before. Lyria struggled to speak, her voice weak. "Please, I need your help." David hesitated. He had seen all sorts of strange things in his time, but this woman, this alien, was different. There was something in her eyes, something raw, and it unsettled him. "What's wrong with you?" he asked, his voice steady, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his words. I'm dying," Lyria managed to say, her body trembling. "My people."
"We need your help. Only a human can save me."
David blinked, confused and skeptical. "A human?"
What do you mean? I'm not a healer.
Lyria took a deep breath, her grip tightening on his arm as she tried to sit up. "It's not about healing. It's a curse." "My people, the Zarathi, are dying, and only a human can stop it."
David frowned. This was crazy.
He had heard wild stories before, but this was something else entirely. Still, there was something in her voice, something that made him want to believe her. "You're saying I can help you?" Lyria nodded weakly. "Please. I don't have much time. You have to come with me."
You're the only one who can help!
David's mind raced. There was no way he could let this alien die. Not like this. But he also couldn't shake the feeling that he was being dragged into something much bigger than he understood. Still, the decision was made in an instant. He offered her his hand. "All right, I'll help," he said, though his voice carried a hint of hesitation. "But you better tell me exactly what's going on."
And we're getting to the bottom of this together.
With his support, Lyria managed to stand, though her strength was fading fast. She was thankful for his help, but she knew the journey ahead would be long, and the stakes higher than either of them could imagine. As they set off together, Lyria couldn't shake the feeling that this was the beginning of something neither of them had expected. For the first time in days, a flicker of hope ignited within her. Maybe, just maybe, the bond between her species and humans was real. Maybe David was the key to breaking the curse. But time was running out, and the unknown dangers of this journey loomed over them like a dark shadow. David didn't know exactly what to expect, but he sure as hell didn't think it would be this difficult. Helping an alien woman? That was a first. But as the days passed, his sense of skepticism began to fade, replaced by a growing curiosity. Lyria was no ordinary traveler. Lyria. He could see that much in the way she moved, in her eyes, even as she struggled to keep her strength up. The sun was already starting to set when they reached the outskirts of the small town he had been staying in. The dusty streets were quiet now, with most of the people either locked inside their homes or gathering at the local cantina. It wasn't much, but it had been enough for David. He hadn't needed much, and life out here was simple. But now, nothing was simple. Lyria had been quiet for the most part, only speaking when necessary. Her face was pale, her skin slick with sweat, and David could see how badly she was suffering. Every now and then, she would stop to steady herself, her breath shallow and ragged. He'd asked her 100 times what kind of curse this was, what it did to her people, but she'd only given him vague answers. It was as if the real truth was too heavy to share, even with someone who had agreed to help. They stopped at a small, makeshift home on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much, just a small cabin with a few basic supplies. David had set it up after leaving the military, hoping for a quiet life away from the chaos of the galaxy. But now, the walls felt too tight. It wasn't just his space anymore. It was hers, too. "Stay here," he told Lyria as he opened the door. "I'll get you some water. You need to rest." Lyria nodded weakly, her hand clutching at the fabric of her sleeve. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. It was the first time she had thanked him, and he couldn't help but feel a strange warmth in his chest. He wasn't used to this, being needed, being relied on. He walked inside, the dim light from a single lantern flickering across the room. There wasn't much here, but it was enough. He poured a glass of water from the small jug he kept on the counter, took a quick drink himself, and then returned to her. She had collapsed onto the small cot in the corner of the room, her breathing still shallow. "Here," he said, offering the glass of water to her. "You need to drink. It'll help. She looked up at him, her eyes clouded with exhaustion. I'm sorry, she whispered, barely managing a smile. I didn't think it would be this hard. I didn't think it would hurt this much.
David knelt beside her, unsure of what to say. She wasn't like the people he had known before. Tough, independent.
Lyria was different. She was vulnerable in a way that made him want to protect her, even if he didn't fully understand why. It's okay, he said gently. Just drink.
We'll figure this out. You're not alone.
For a moment, there was silence. Then, slowly, she reached out for the water. She drank it down, her hands shaking slightly. Afterward, she leaned back, resting her head against the pillow. David took a seat beside the cot, watching her carefully. He didn't know how much longer she could last like this. The fever was taking its toll. The more he saw of it, the less he believed it was some kind of normal sickness. Whatever was happening to her, it was far worse than anything he had ever seen.
Tell me more, he said softly, about your people.
About this curse. Lyria looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of pain and resignation.
The Scifi have lived with this curse for generations, she began slowly. It is a part of us, something we cannot escape.
Every few centuries, it manifests in the strongest of us, those with the most power. It is not a disease, but a transformation. She paused, her breath catching in her throat as she struggled to explain. We are born with a power, something we don't fully understand. It can take many forms, but when it awakens, it consumes us. It turns us into something else, something dangerous. It is as if the power inside us becomes too much to control. If we do not find balance, if we do not find someone to help us, the transformation is complete. We lose ourselves. David's heart tightened. He had heard stories of powerful ancient species, but this was something else.
So you're telling me that your people have been cursed with this power?
And that only a human can stop it? Lyria nodded, her eyes distant. Yes. There is a legend among my people, passed down through generations.
It is said that the Scifi once formed an alliance with humans long ago, a bond forged in a time when our species were allies.
The legend says that only a human could prevent the transformation, could stop the curse from taking full hold. But the connection was lost. The knowledge faded. Now, I am the last of my kind who can carry this burden. And I must find a human, or else I will become something. David's mind was racing. He didn't understand all of it. He didn't even fully believe it. But the way she said it, the way she looked at him, it was enough to make him start believing. But even so, how could he help her? What did he have to offer? You said that only a human can stop it, David said slowly. But why me? I'm not special. I'm just me. Lyria's eyes softened. You are special, David. Not because of who you were, but because of who you are now. Your experiences, your strength, they are what I need before. You've lived through things that I cannot even begin to understand. You have the power inside you, whether you know it or not. You are the key. David shook his head, still unsure. But I don't have any power. I'm just a soldier. I left that life behind.
And that is why you are the one who can help, Lyria said, her voice steady despite the weakness in her body. It is not about power, David.
It is about understanding, about accepting the truth, about realizing that sometimes the greatest strength comes from within. David sat back, absorbing her words. The night stretched on, the soft hum of the planet's winds outside the cabin the only sound. It felt as though time had stopped, that everything in the universe had narrowed down to this one moment.
You're asking me to believe in something I don't fully understand,
David said, his voice barely above a whisper.
I am asking you to believe in me,
Lyria replied, and in us. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the weight of the decision David would have to make. In that moment, he knew there was no turning back. Whatever this was, whatever she needed from him, he couldn't walk away.
All right,
he said finally, his voice firm.
I'll help you. We'll figure this out together.
Lyria's eyes shone with gratitude, but her body trembled as the fever continued to rise. She knew they didn't have much time. She had made her choice. Now, it was up to them both to find a way to break the curse, to save her before it was too late. But as David stood up and began to prepare for the journey ahead, he realized something. This wasn't just about saving her. This was about finding something in himself he had long since buried. This was about a connection neither of them had expected, but one they would need to survive. And no matter how difficult the path ahead seemed, he couldn't back down now. Not after all that had happened. Not after everything they had yet to face. The following days felt like a blur. David and Lyria had grown used to their new rhythm. She would rest while he gathered what little supplies they had, and then they would begin their search again. The planet they were on was harsh, unforgiving. The terrain was rugged, with endless stretches of dry desert and jagged mountains that seemed to go on forever. There were few signs of civilization out here, but they had no choice but to press on. The legend Lyria had shared with David seemed to guide them, though it felt like they were chasing shadows. There was supposed to be an ancient artifact, something that could help stop the curse buried somewhere in these harsh lands. The more they searched, the more David realized that they were running out of time. The fever was taking a toll on Lyria, and he could see it in the way she moved, how she stumbled on occasion, how her breaths came shallow and fast. Every morning he woke up to the same sight, Lyria, pale and barely able to sit up, her eyes distant, her body weak. It was a struggle for her just to stay awake, but she would force herself to rise, to keep going, because she knew that if they didn't reach the artifact soon, it would be too late. The curse would claim her, and there would be nothing left but ashes. David didn't know what kept him going. Maybe it was the bond they had begun to form, despite the strange circumstances that had brought them together. Maybe it was the fact that, against all logic, he believed her. She wasn't like the other aliens he had encountered in his lifetime. There was a vulnerability about her that seemed so human. Her strength wasn't in her ability to fight or survive alone. It was in her resilience, in her will to live. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, David stopped. He looked out over the barren landscape and felt a pang of guilt. They were getting nowhere. The artifact was nowhere to be found, and Lyria was getting worse. "How much longer do you think we can keep this up?" he asked, his voice tired. Lyria, who had been walking beside him, stopped and took a deep breath. The air was dry, and the wind carried sand that stung against their skin. She wiped a hand across her forehead, but it didn't help much. She was too tired to even care. "I don't know," she admitted quietly.
But we have no choice. I can't give up now. David looked at her, his brow furrowing.
He had never been one to give up easily, but this was something different. The weight of her words hit him hard.
"I don't know how much longer you can keep going,"
he said. "You're pushing yourself too hard, Lyria. You need to rest." "I can't rest. Not until we find it." The determination in her voice was unmistakable. She was right. They couldn't stop now. But every part of him wanted to shout at her, to tell her that there was nothing more they could do, that they had reached the end of the road. But he knew she wouldn't hear him. She couldn't. Not when she had come this far. "I'll find it," she whispered. almost to herself. I have to. David let out a long breath and nodded. They didn't have time for doubt. They had to keep moving. The next few days were even harder. They had no leads, no direction, and Lyria was getting worse. It was as if the curse was closing in on her, consuming her from the inside. Her fever never fully subsided. She was barely able to keep her eyes open, and when she did, it was as if she were seeing something far beyond what was around her. One night, when the cold of the desert began to bite at their skin, David couldn't take it anymore. He had to say something.
Listen to me,
He said, as he helped her sit by a small fire.
You've pushed yourself too far. I'm not going to let you die out here.
Lyria's eyes flickered with something. Was it anger? Frustration? She had never been one to show weakness, to admit defeat, but her lips trembled as she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm not going to die. Not yet.
There's too much at stake. David sat down beside her, his face serious. I'm not talking about the curse.
I'm talking about you! I can't keep watching you suffer like this, Lyria.
You need to rest. You need to stop running. We don't have to do this alone. Lyria shook her head weakly, as if trying to push away his words. I can't rest.
Not while there's still a chance.
David sighed, frustrated but understanding. She was too far gone to hear him, and maybe part of him didn't want to accept the truth either. If they didn't find the artifact, if they didn't break the curse, she was going to die. They both knew that, but it wasn't something either of them could face right now. As the fire crackled between them, Lyria leaned her head against David's shoulder, the warmth of his body offering some comfort in the cold night. He let her, though he couldn't deny the growing ache in his chest. He had never expected to be in this position, stuck on a distant world with an alien woman, trying to find some lost relic that could save her life. But the longer he stayed, the more he realized that he wasn't just doing this out of obligation. He cared for her. She had become a part of his life in ways he hadn't anticipated, and now he couldn't walk away. He gently wrapped an arm around her as she drifted off to sleep, her breathing still shallow, the fever burning hotter than ever. And as he sat there, watching the fire flicker in the darkness, he made a promise to himself. He would get her through this, even if it killed him. The following morning, something unexpected happened. As they continued their journey, Lyria suddenly stopped, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the horizon.
I feel it, she said, her voice barely audible. It's close.
I can feel it. David looked at her, his heart racing. He hadn't seen her so alert in days. She was pale, barely standing, but there was a fire in her eyes now, a spark of hope. He followed her gaze, searching the barren land ahead. And then, through the dust and sand, he saw it. A shape, barely visible through the haze of the desert, stood tall in the distance, a structure, ancient and weathered by time. It was more than just a ruin. It was the artifact she had spoken of, the one that could stop the curse. And it was closer than ever. David felt a rush of adrenaline surge through him. They had found it. After days of wandering, they had finally found the key to saving her. Lyria was already moving forward, though she was struggling to keep her balance. Her strength was fading, but her resolve was stronger than ever. We're so close, she whispered. We can do this! David grabbed her arm, steadying her as they walked toward the structure. The air was thick with anticipation. He didn't know what lay ahead, what kind of trial they would face once they reached it. But for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he had hope. And maybe, just maybe, they could stop the curse before it was too late.